Fire department, what's the address of your emergency?
Yeah, this is 3611 Avenue.
It was just after midnight when officials here at the prison found Lawrence Phillips unresponsive in his cell.
Lawrence Phillips I knew was a football player, a star football player in high school.
To the 6, and Lawrence Phillips darts up the middle for the touchdown.
Growing up as a ward of the state and in a group home, it just absolutely damaged Lawrence to a degree that he could never overcome it.
We have a letter from Lawrence, and it's in clearly different handwriting.
Inmate G31982 was the most famous man in Kern Valley State Prison, not because of his egregious crimes against other people, but because back in the 1990s, Lawrence Phillips was the most dominant running back in college football. Not only did he manage to have over 2,000 all-purpose yards in one season, but while attending Nebraska, he helped brute force his team to 3 straight national championship appearances. He was so good that he was drafted 6th overall by the St. Louis Rams, and by the end of his career, it would end so tragically that he would cause his head coach, Dick Vermeil, to literally cry because he was the most talented running back that he's ever coached. But instead of fulfilling his potential, Lawrence Phillips' life would end in tragedy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to reintroduce one of our flagship series on this channel. This is the Lawrence Phillips murder mystery. Break! Lawrence Phillips was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, raised by a single mother who had several men in and out of both of their lives. It was a sad environment that was so neglectful that a documentary crew couldn't even find a photo of Lawrence from his childhood. At age 11, he moved to the West Coast where his mother abandoned him. Thus, he grew up in foster homes in California. One such home was McLaren Hall, a dangerous place for troubled children known for abuse, gang activity, and deplorable conditions. So unfit for kids that it closed down in 2003. After a year at McLaren, he was moved to a nicer foster home and even was taken in by a family for a short time while attending West Covina High School. Even as a freshman and sophomore though, he was one of those rare pure athletes, becoming a varsity starter on both sides of the ball, a running back on the offensive end and an outside linebacker on defense. He was the fastest and strongest out of all of his teammates, and after transferring to Baldwin Park High School for his final 2 years, he also led his team to back-to-back CIF championships with 4.4 blazing speed and a bull-like build. Lawrence Phillips possessed a very rare mix of both brains and brawn, and as a result, all of the top college football recruiters came calling. A legendary coach from the Big 12, Tom Osborne, made his visit while Lawrence Phillips was living in a foster home and convinced Phillips to be his next star running back. Nebraska in the early 1990s was the University of Alabama of today, and for a few years was the best team in all of the Power 5 conferences. So Lawrence Phillips headed to Lincoln, Nebraska, where he would shine on the football field, but it was there in the heartland that his troubles would soon begin to escalate off of the field. Playing off the bench his freshman year, he progressively improved, and during the 1994 Orange Bowl, he rushed for 183 yards against Florida State, with Nebraska losing the national title with just over a minute remaining in the game. After the season, Lawrence found himself in court from a November incident. He had been charged with assault, disturbing the peace, and vandalism during an altercation with a 21-year-old. First, he was slapped with diversion, and then he was charged in November of 1994 when he failed to complete the program, but the trial wouldn't start until after his sophomore season at Nebraska. During his sophomore season, Lawrence Phillips began to shatter records, rushing for 100 yards in 11 games, finishing the season for 1,722 yards on the ground. The Cornhuskers went undefeated and beat the University of Miami for Tom Osborne's first national championship. Before his highly anticipated junior season, Phillips was investigated by the NCAA for accepting lunch from a sports agent. After reimbursing the agent $100, the NCAA then ruled Lawrence Phillips eligible, and he quickly rose to the top of the Heisman Trophy watch list. Against Michigan State, who was then coached by Nick Saban, Lawrence Phillips would rush for 206 yards with 4 touchdowns in the 50-10 win, which was the worst loss of Nick Saban's career. Through the first 2 games, Phillips had 359 yards and 7 touchdowns. Yes, 7 touchdowns in 2 games. He was well on his way to winning the Heisman, and unfortunately, he flushed it all away. Immediately after that standout game, Phillips partied with friends and returned home at around 3 a.m. He received a phone call that his ex-girlfriend had gone home with another Huskers player. According to Nebraska coaches via a Bleacher Report article, Lawrence has major abandonment issues, especially when it comes to females because of how he was treated by his mother, said a former Nebraska staffer. He was never given the proper counseling to develop coping mechanisms when he's put in a high-stress situation. When he got the call in the middle of the night, he just lost it. Obviously, at some point or another, these issues and this psychological damage that he took earlier on in his life is bound to come up at some point. Lawrence Phillips would then commit a crime against that same woman that would lead to many other transgressions in his semi-charged but ultimately very sad life. A sad life because, like we said earlier, this is an individual that possessed both brains and brawn, something that you don't often see in athletes, but it gets way worse. On September 10th, 1995, Lawrence Phillips scaled a 4-story apartment building via the fire escape to enter the sliding glass door of the 3rd floor residence of Nebraska backup quarterback Scott Frost. Inside the apartment with Frost was Kate McEwen, a Huskers women's basketball player, who was Lawrence Phillips' ex-girlfriend. Phillips proceeded to drag McEwen out of the residence by her hair and down 3 flights of stairs before he proceeded to hit her head against a mailbox, punch her in the face, and then punch her through several metal mailboxes. Phillips returned home out of breath, and his roommate asked him what happened, with Phillips replying,
I said, well, what happened? He said, I tried to kill her.
Phillips then turns himself into the authorities the next morning and subsequently would be suspended from the team. Headlines blared in the fact that Phillips was not dismissed from the team, but only suspended. His suspension lasted for 6 games. Phillips played in the final 2 games of the Huskers season and then was again named the starter for their national championship game, which was the Fiesta Bowl in the 1996 season, where he would rush for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns and added another touchdown via a reception. The University of Nebraska football team would win another national championship in a 62-24 beatdown of the Florida Gators. Phillips, at that moment, at the height of his powers and notoriety, would declare for the 1996 NFL Draft, with his talent outshining his dark past. But his dark past would definitely come back to get him in the worst way possible. NFL teams failed to take into consideration Phillips' track record off the field, turning a blind eye to the fact that he was violent against a woman.
With the 6th pick in the first round, the St. Louis Rams select Lawrence Phillips, running back, Nebraska.
The Rams trade Jerome Bettis to the Pittsburgh Steelers, investing fully in their brand new rookie with a checkered past and soon to be a horrifying present. Even before his first NFL game, Lawrence Phillips was arrested and charged with a DUI in June 1996, with his rookie contract offer being cut in half from over $10 million to just over $5 million. That is one pricey night of drinks. During his rookie season, Lawrence Phillips made 11 starts, appearing in 15 games, rushing for 632 yards and 4 touchdowns. But that summer, he served 23 nights in jail for violating his probation. The next season, the St. Louis Rams got a new head coach, a big-hearted players coach by the name of Dick Vermeil. In 10 starts under Vermeil, Lawrence Phillips rushed for 634 yards and was struggling with committing fully to the team. After issues with alcohol and being unable to stay in top condition for the NFL, Phillips first lost his starting position in the lineup and then ultimately lost his job. This brought his head coach to tears, which at the time you might think it's not a big deal because Dick Vermeil was known for how often he would cry, but this time was a little different.
Boy, my eyes sunk. I was so upset.
Dick Vermeil would tell the story of Lawrence Phillips passing out on the field during pregame warmups during a November 1997 game with the Rams. That was the 10th game of the season, and it would be Phillips' final game in St. Louis. When athletic trainers rushed to the running back side, they could smell alcohol on him and told Vermeil it wasn't the first time Phillips reeked of booze on game day. The running back was notorious for being out in clubs and bars until 4 a.m., even on a night before a game. Dick Vermeil said,
if I had it to do over again today, I might not have fired him. A wasted, gifted human being.
Another silver-haired coach in Jimmy Johnson gave Lawrence Phillips another chance and signed him to the Miami Dolphins for their 1997 playoff run. And you have to bear in mind that this Miami Dolphins team theoretically had the pieces to make a nice little run. When you consider the fact that the Miami Dolphins had the second worst rushing offense in the league, their desperation rationalized the fact that they signed Lawrence Phillips. But South Beach was by far the worst environment that Lawrence Phillips could have ever been in. South Florida is a place where nightclubs are on every corner and are open until dawn, and alcohol flows freely. Sure enough, after only 2 games in a Dolphins uniform and averaging not even 3 yards a carry, Miami released the former first-round pick after he was charged with assaulting a woman after she refused his advances. During the 1998 NFL season, Lawrence Phillips was out of football, and the next year he traveled overseas to play in NFL Europe, where he would once again dominate, rushing over 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns. He set NFL Europe records with the Barcelona Dragons, and he was even named the league MVP in 1999. While in Barcelona, Phillips would also rarely go out, and he would only play dominoes with his teammates. He supposedly took a liking to the warm Mediterranean water, so desperate NFL teams would once again show interest in the ex-con, as the 49ers general manager, the legendary Bill Walsh, would sign Lawrence Phillips just based on the merit that he was friends with Lawrence Phillips' head coach when he was in Nebraska. The 49ers gave Lawrence the ultimatum that if he slipped up once, he would be released. And in training camp, he pulled a hamstring. Then the big red flag was when Lawrence was not carrying the ball. His effort in supporting his teammates, tasks like blocking, were more than lackluster. As a backup running back, his time on the field was mostly during kick returns. When he was in the game during a normal offensive series, Phillips failed to do his job and block, and he was the reason that Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young was sacked so hard that he was knocked unconscious in Week 3 against the Arizona Cardinals. It was that hit, one that should have been blocked, that prematurely ended Steve Young's career. By mid-November, Lawrence Phillips refused to practice, and the 49ers suspended him for 3 games. On November 23rd, he would get released by the San Francisco 49ers. At this point, Lawrence Phillips' life begins to spiral out of control, as now he is careless and completely out of football. Lawrence Phillips also had no money at all, as he didn't take care of his financial situation when he was in the NFL. Even with his career cut short, he should have had more than enough to get by, as he made over $5 million in his career. We'd go out for a night, just the 2 of us, and by the end of the night, there would be 30 people in our group at a club, said one of Phillips' friends. Lawrence would pay for everybody, and this happened a lot. The former running back became very dependent on a bottle of rum, his drink of choice, that he became hooked on while playing in Spain. Phillips continued to attempt success at what he does best, playing football, but failed at a shot in the AFL in Florida. Then he moved to Beverly Hills, where he continued to abuse the ones he supposedly loved by being accused of choking a live-in girlfriend. Before authorities could catch up with him on that incident, he was invited to join a CFL roster and moved to Canada. While in Montreal playing with the Alouettes, Lawrence returned to elite form as he rushed over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns as he made the league's All-Star game and helped the Alouettes win the Grey Cup, the CFL's equivalent to the Super Bowl. However, after the season, Phillips was again accused of choking a live-in girlfriend to the point of her nearly dying. He was released, and by the end of 2003, he was officially out of all of football and had no money. Upon returning to the US, he moved to San Diego and had another live-in girlfriend who he abused frequently, and when she asked him to leave, he abused her to the point that police call it the worst strangulation they have ever seen of a person that actually ended up surviving. Lawrence Phillips had a warrant out for his arrest and ended up meeting with his ex-girlfriend again, where Lawrence Phillips beat her up even worse. In August 2005, out of no money and knowing that the police are after him, he flees in his ex-girlfriend's car to LA with only $100 on him that he had just borrowed from a former high school teammate. Once Phillips arrived in Los Angeles, he went to play a pickup football game with a group of kids at Exposition Park. After the game was over, Phillips could not find his $100, which was stored in his shoe, and accused the teenage boys he had just played with of stealing his money. Lawrence jumped into his not really his as he stole it from his ex-girlfriend, SUV and drove it towards the kids on the field. They were able to escape the incident with no life-threatening injuries, but 2 minors and a 19-year-old were injured, with one going through the windshield. In October of 2006, Lawrence Phillips was convicted of 7 counts of felony assault with a deadly weapon from the incident after the pickup football game. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and during his time in jail is accused of various other domestic violence and assault charges, all the abuse of significant others, and then is convicted of an earlier domestic violence charge against an ex-girlfriend, adding another 25 years. Ultimately, he is sentenced to 31 plus years at Kern Valley State Prison, one of the harshest prisons in California, which is full of gangs and is on constant lockdown due to inmates' bad behavior. As inmate G31982, clad in a blue jumpsuit, Phillips spent most of his time in the slammer reading books. Lawrence Phillips would do push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups to the point of exhaustion. Then he would run up and down the field just like he was training for the NFL Combine's 40-yard dash. In the afternoons, he would eat a sack of lunch and work on his appeal of the felony assault and domestic assault, but with no money, he couldn't hire a private lawyer. During these days, he also wrote many letters to mentors and coaches from Nebraska that showed a gentler side to the now criminal but former Nebraska legend. Most of the letters showed how he was concerned that Nebraska football was not as dominant as they once had been. One consistency in the letters included a general upbeat attitude, along with the constant mention of the jailhouse being in lockdown. One of the assistant coaches at Nebraska, George Darlington, would frequently trade letters with Phillips and said that he was focused on the future, on getting out and getting another chance at life. During Phillips' time at Kearns, he did not join a jailhouse gang and kept to himself. He was not someone who caused problems, and he was really quiet, just doing his own thing. The former NFL player then asked for solitary confinement for his own protection when fellow inmates were after him. Then, for unknown reasons, he was moved into a cell with Damian Soward, who was a cousin of the former USC Trojan and NFL wide receiver R.J. Soward. Damian Soward was a member of the Inland Empire Projects gang and was serving 82 years to life for the murder of a rival gang member. Soon, Lawrence Phillips and the inability to control his temper and his internal demons would, this time, prematurely end another's life. On April 11th, Damian Soward was found dead via strangulation in the cell he shared with Phillips. Although it may have been in self-defense, by authorities it was considered premeditated, with Phillips being named the murder suspect and charged with first-degree murder. Then, while awaiting trial to determine if he would receive the death penalty or not, the story of Lawrence Phillips ended. On January 13, 2016, at the age of 40, the two-time NCAA national champion, first-round NFL draft pick, and convicted criminal was found dead in his cell, strangled by a bedsheet. Taped upon his chest was a small note that read, "Do not resuscitate." Closed by his body, inside of a sock, was a second note of which the contents were never revealed, along with a photograph of Phillips and a young boy. It was never determined who the boy was in the photo. It was suspected and later confirmed that Lawrence Phillips died of suicide. His brain was donated to Boston University to be examined for CTE, one of over 100 former football players' brains that have been donated to the university. Lawrence Phillips' own mother believes that her son may have had a temper, but the violence he enacted was strictly caused by CTE.
So it's really sad when you see that much talent end up like that, and that's one reason why we do what we do, because I think if Lawrence had had somebody in his life, a mentor, somebody stable, somebody that cared about him when he was 8 or 9 years old, quite likely he would have seen a different outcome.